particular crisis. And I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dimitri, for doing this on time, and I apologize for mistakenly forwarding slides too early. Let's not get distracted by the COVID-19 crisis. Recognize the impact it does have on workers while we build systems, real systems intervention. Thank you very much. Now we go on to the next speaker. See if I can forward a slide. So this speaker is, I want to welcome Aykut Kazanci. He's a senior supply chain specialist in China. Aykut, can you hear us and can we hear you?
Yes, I can. I'm afraid my sound is not very clear, but I will do my best to be close to the screen. Is that okay?
It sounds good. Thank you.
Good. So we will focus on the monitoring part of the supply chain responsibility because it is one of the very active tools we regularly use. But we're not passing to regular times. These are the extraordinary times. And so there are two overarching questions, whether we should continue monitoring or not. And the next one is how, which might take quite long to answer. But in a quick nutshell, what we used to say for training, I think, is equally true for monitoring today. We used to say, if business is good, if there are good times, give some money for training, allocate some budget for it. And when the business is not good, just double it. So I think it's true for monitoring too. There are many reasons for that, but in a quick answer, there are certain issues which are actually known for a long time in the supply chain, but they're actually multiplying. And I picked especially three of them. One is we are hearing more and more that wages for workers are unfairly reduced or delayed. Whether this is reasonable, understandable, legal, mutually agreed or not, of course, is a huge question. The next one is some factories are forcing employees to stay in work 24/7 when they are quarantined due to COVID outbreaks, which we are hearing in Turkey and some other countries. Again, whether this is legal, mutually agreed or not, is only can be answered by monitoring. And another interesting and quite concerning issue that we are constantly hearing in the auditors' world is buyers themselves, the retailers, buying houses, brands, and so on, are unreasonably extending the payment terms to suppliers in the supply chain, which is, of course, not directly related to workers' rights, but it is definitely directly impacting their livelihoods. So responsible organizations like us and buyers and public procurers need to monitor factories more and more these days to understand the extent of these issues. And of course, on top of these, add to COVID-related preventive measures, which might be ignored. Distancing in the factories may need quite a comprehensive layout restructuring. Personal protection equipment needs better, proper, renewed equipment. And think about hygiene needs in the factories, where in most factories we normally monitor in their normal times. We hardly ever find soaps, and let alone we need sufficient soap and disinfectants in the workplace today. So all needs monitoring and training. But of course, the big question is, how can we monitor factories in the today's world? There are certain ways. Some companies temporarily stop monitoring, which is of course trivial and quite concerning. Some factories some buyers are relying on self-assessment from factories, but many buyers and brands are also using what we can call an online auditing today, and in different forms. There are snapshot online auditing, which are still not, of course, serving the purpose, like having a quick chat with the factory managers, like a Zoom meeting. But we are also hearing there are quite reasonably conducted extended audits and monitoring activities by online tools, using, for example, a walkthrough person in the factory to see the measures online. taking some of the workers' contact lists and interviewing workers even remotely by phone on a Sunday.
1 minute. Sorry
okay, thank you. I'm just wrapping up. Thank you, Björn. And of course, we can do a risk assessment today where we should focus. We are reading that in, for example, countries like China and Vietnam, it is possible to still physically monitor the factories by local teams, but this is not possible in many countries, and also, even if it is possible, it is dangerous. So we need to find a kind of combination of monitoring by using several available tools in the market. And I think I will stop at this point. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Aykut, raising very interesting questions about alternative tools to conduct monitoring that are sorely needed still, and especially needed perhaps during this time of crisis. As you'll see, we only have germs of ideas here, and I'm sure that all presenters will be more than happy to get back to you to explain further about their ideas. So going on to the next presenter, we have now Hakim, who is managing director for the Center for Development and Integration, CDI, in Vietnam. Ha, can you hear us and can we hear you?
Thank you, Björn.
Great.
The one idea from CDI is very simple. It's the transparency. And actually, from our perspective, as a labor rights organization from production countries, we think that transparency is a key point, a starting point for every action to be followed up. The transparency should be from top level, from policy commitments to the real actions, not just lip service from the manager or PR marketing campaigns. From our perspective, the transparency is really important, especially for the brands and factories. It's not a new thing. Actually, COVID-19 is only a push to show that we need to make it better and make it more transparent throughout the supply chains. And from our own experience in getting information and data and trying to get in touch with the brands and factory, we found out that information and transparency is really important. And we hope that brands and factories will be more active in publishing own information related to their commitments and reaction related to the business and human rights. I know that very big company, they already have a nice and beautiful policy public on the website, but that is somehow the theories, and we need to have more concrete information how they turn it into action in the real life. For example, the sustainability reports, we need more detailed information, especially for each country, factories, and any violation or risks that they have found out and how they will follow up with the improvement plans. Also, we look forward to have the list of suppliers and buyers in the country for the brands so that we can contact when it's required to discard the risks of violations. And finally, we think that the transparency should include also the openness and the trust from all stakeholders to have more constructive dialogue. Only when we are open, then the dialogue can begin. And finally, I think it is the consumer, the buyer who bear the cost, and it is the worker who bear the loss during the crisis. So without really the transparency and really the real commitment from all stakeholders, we cannot improve anything. And a crisis give us a chance to dialogue and improve the things. But it should come from the transparency as an entry point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tuha, for your very concise presentation. COVID-19 crisis really highlights the need for more transparency for companies to turn their commitments policy into action and show how to do it. And the crisis is also a chance for dialogue among stakeholders. Thank you so much. And we now move on to the next speaker, Merci Correcha Torrens, who is the Director General of the Public Procurement of the Government of Catalonia in Spain. Merci, welcome, and can you hear us, and can we hear you?
Yes, I can hear you, and
fantastic.
Thank you very much, Bjorn. Good morning, everybody. Thank you to Electronics Watch for inviting me to this webinar. I will focus on how public procurement can be an opportunity to get over the economic crisis. COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted some of the weaknesses of public procurement in Catalonia and Spain as well. Like a mirror put in front of us, we have seen all the worst of our system, like the excessive length of proceedings, the dependence of far markets, and the bureaucratic burdens as the principal obstacles. On the contrary, we are strong in social and green public procurement, and we have a lot of SMEs which are able to innovate and to bring knowledge and value to public procurement. I am proud to say that, for example, in 2018, 7 out of 10 euros spent by the Catalan government in public procurement included social clauses, while in 2016, they were only 4 out of 10 euros. We have increased also the green clauses from 2 out of 10 euros in 2016 to 4 out of 10 euros in 2018. An intensive action has been performed in the last 3 years by improving codes, guides, and models. As the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown have hit hard local and small companies and has destroyed a lot of jobs as well, innovation procurement and social and green public procurement can offer a lot of opportunities to get over the crisis. We are working now to improve our public procurement through a Catalan public procurement strategy, which is a plan to have a more transparent, digital, smart, and efficient public procurement. It will have about 25-30 measures to be developed during the next 4 years. Some of the measures included in the plan are, for example, the creation of a new platform to increase the collaboration between public administrations and private companies and entities. Another measure is the promotion of new social and green clauses adapted to the new situation. For example, to score or to impose as an obligation during the performance of a contract the hiring of unemployed people, or stable hiring, or with better working conditions. Some examples of green clauses can be to score the use of alternative energies to promote energy efficiency in public buildings, to score the inclusion of organic food in meals, in contracts of schools or hospitals, or the reduction of the carbon footprint in contracts, like cleaning or security and others. At the same time, I want to mention that the Catalan government is launching 20 projects in the framework of an economic recovery plan, approved in July, which is based in 3 axes. To reduce social inequalities increased by COVID-19, to accelerate the transition to a more sustainable and resilient economic model, and to strengthen the capacity of the health and social health system. The total amount of the plan is about 31,765 million euros. That's a lot of money. And they have long-term projects and short-term projects as well. One project I want to mention is the digital transformation of the education sector.
1 minute, please, Merci, 1 minute.
Okay, about 24 million in 2020 and 160 million in the period 2021-2025. In this project, for example, we are going to buy computers for all teachers and students, about 300,000 computers for all the schools, and the installation of a quality LAN Wi-Fi in 1,230 schools. So there are a lot of projects also in climate action, circular economy, housing and sustainable mobility and energy efficiency as well. I think most of the projects will use public procurement as a tool, and I hope they will have and they will create a lot of opportunities for local companies, for SMEs, and for big companies as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Merci, for this hopeful message. I think public procurement is a powerful tool to get us out of economic crisis if we use social clauses, as Catalonia is increasing over the last 4 or 5 years. So thank you very much for this. Next speaker is Stéphane Beauvais, Public Policies Manager at UGAP in France. Stéphane, can you hear us?
Yes, and I'm ready.
Perfect, thank you.
So I go on?
Yes, we can hear you fine, thank you.
So hello everybody. The activity of UGAP is to buy by public procurement to private sector to some product and services, and after we sell these product and services to public sector with a tender. So the rest of our supplier is crucial for us. So the idea we want to share is to strengthen link and mutual knowledge between us, all suppliers, their subcontractors. Why is it important? During the COVID crisis, of course, we took care of the health of our suppliers. It is very important, and finance, we decided with each of them to go on or to stop the contract. For instance, to stop the order from our customer. The idea was to not generate delayed penalties. It would put our suppliers in difficulty if we go on when a supplier is not able to deliver the product. So we have to adapt each situation to the situation of our suppliers. We are used to take care of the suppliers, and especially it's in our DNA. We have some acquired results in this field. The half of our suppliers are SME. We pay in less than 30 days. We have a SME barometer, for instance. So we consider that have some value, which have impact on our behavior. And we consider that this behavior helps us to be stronger. And for instance, our turnover went on to increase during crisis, and we are convinced that the behavior in direction of SME and suppliers is a reason of our turnover, which had to increase during crisis. So we had two ideas. Sorry. The first one was to share our behavior with our suppliers. Our suppliers know our method to work, but we are not sure they know our value, our vision, our philosophy. And we decided to share with them in order they have the good behavior themselves with their subcontractors, because we want that the whole supply chain will be stronger with the help of behavior between the stakeholders. So the first thing we did, we create a webinar program in order to share these values, or public policies, or vision, the way to business responsible and not only business for business. And we share all this vision as we record the webinar. Of course, we're able to share with new suppliers this vision in order to help them to be stronger. And as I said, it could help them to have a better behavior with their own subcontractors, their own suppliers. And in this way, we realized that we weren't sure to know exactly what are the relationship between our suppliers and the subcontractor and their subcontractor. We are not sure to know all the subcontractors. We are not sure to know if they are well paid, if they know at least the content of our contract with the suppliers. And it's important because we saw it during the COVID crisis. If a subcontractor fails, we fail too. It's a part of the supply chain, like us. So we decided to investigate it. We create some questionnaires in direction of suppliers in direction of the subcontractors now and in direction of our own buyers. The goal is to know the relationship between the suppliers and the subcontractors. And today we ask about the question from the contract we have already seen.
1
But
minute,
tomorrow
please. 1 minute.
we will investigate this question during the tender in order to know what is the quality of this relationship. And after tomorrow, we'll certainly integrate in our evaluation, in the selection, this quality of relationship. Because, for instance, you can say that a BCP or a BRP of a subcontractor is important for the quality of service you are buying. So we hope, certainly in several years, that at the end, the quality of this relationship could be integrated of the selection method of the offer during a tender. I have finished, so I thank you.
Thank you so very much, Stefan, for this important message of communication, collaboration, knowledge sharing among public buyers, suppliers, and subcontractors on many different levels. We're all connected, and what happens on one level impacts what happens on another level. So thank you so much for this. We go on to another continent, to Australia. Steve Johnston, who's Director of Strategic Procurement at the Council of Australasian University Directors of Information Technology. Steve, are you there and can you hear us?
I am here.
Fantastic.
And yes, I can hear you. That's great.
Okay.
So Cordit's been around for a couple of decades now. We've been working since the early 1990s, and we've been largely involved in collaborative work across the higher education sector in Australia. And we've done a lot of work as a group, and we've discovered that by working together, we're able to significantly change both our expenditure patterns and the activities that are undertaken by our vendors. The key driver is a reduction in duplication. So all of the universities in Australia and New Zealand, which are our key constituents, have very similar requirements. And by aligning those requirements and making sure that they're addressed together, we're able to achieve a number of things. The first thing we're able to do, obviously, is we're able to generate savings. We're able to drive down pricing for a number of reasons. We make things easier for vendors to provide services to the sector, and we align those services across all of our independent businesses. And the expenditure we've got within IT just in that university sector is about 2.8 billion Australian dollars per year. So it's not an insignificant amount of expenditure. A lot of that does go on staffing and resourcing, but much of it goes to vendor purchasing, and much of that goes to collaborative purchasing that is done on behalf of the sector. What it does is it gives us the ability to not just drive down price, but it also gives us the ability to shift the goals of the particular vendors that we're working with and to change their approach as we change ours. So as a group of universities, and we've got about 63 members of Cordit, if we all start asking for the same terms, conditions, and requirements around modern slavery, we're going to be able to have an impact upon the vendors that we work with that is significantly greater than the individual universities working alone. We're backed up in Australia by the Modern Slavery Act that was introduced in 2018 and is in the process of being rolled out across all of the universities. I think the first reporting date is in early 2021. But there's a lot of effort being put into that right now. And during this crisis, it's really an opportune moment to take stock, to look at the various demands and the various requirements of the universities, to align them together and to work not just to generate savings, but to also generate changing behaviour from our vendors and to make sure that those behaviours meet our common goals and common demands. Now, we've achieved over the last 20 years or so significant financial savings, and we're hoping that those savings haven't had to come at the cost of social issues in the countries that have been supplying us for the last period of time. There's some evidence that we certainly could have done this better, and we're taking the approach that from here on, we'll obviously be tracking these things significantly more closely. In 2021, Coordit is setting up a panel, a working group that will be working and looking at due diligence requirements across all of our vendor relationships. Modern slavery is but part of that. There are protections around privacy, corporate social responsibility, combined planning and combined demand to ensure that we're not duplicating the services that we've got and the services we operate.
1 minute, please, Steve, 1 minute.
Thank you. And to effectively tidy up what we've been doing. And so my key message is around collaboration. By working together, we're able to drive these things significantly faster than they would otherwise be driven, and to ensure that our vendors have the focus that we would like them to have on reducing modern slavery as a concern. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve, and thank you also for this important message that collaboration actually works. You drive down price and you achieve social goals, collaboration among public buyers in this case. So thank you so much for this. We go on to the next speaker. And I asked Albert right before the presentation about the pronunciation of his last name, and now it slipped through my head a little bit. But Albert Geukries, who's Contract Category Manager, Data Centers at the Ministry of Education, Culture and Science in the Netherlands. Albert, thank you and welcome. You can hear us.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Albert Geukries. Björn pronounced it very well. Today I have this opportunity to tell something about the Dutch government and how we address the sustainability and the resilient supply chain issue, which is all about this webinar. First, before I get to the slide, I will tell something about the Dutch government. We have set long-term goals on sustainability, and it is anchored in policy. And the policy is called Purchasing with Impact. And for every purchasing, for example, paper or ICT hardware or food, there are goals set, which is obligatory. When you place a tender in the market, it has to contain those things where we can provide impact in the markets. Well, that's the starting point, and we don't see any budget cost already. We think as responsible for data center hardware, which we are talking about server, storage, networking, that kind of appliances and hardware. We see an increase of spend on those things, but in 2016, the category data center, which is responsible for all data center hardware for the Dutch government, has already started with a focus on social conditions, and we're continuing our focus on social conditions with the new policy, Purchasing with Impact. And we have built a strategy around that, and we were just intensifying our effort in sustainable supply chain, with focus on mandatory application in tenders of clauses contain sustainability and social clauses. We have a strong focus on contract management, but you could put a lot of things in your tenders, but if you don't follow up in a contract management phase, you miss a big statement. And we are working towards a so-called price sustainable ratio in our mini tenders. We are setting up supplier management. We have discussions with our main vendors, and we get input from Electronics Watch, and we have also input from another independent monitoring organization called EcoVadis. With those two inputs, we have this supplier management talks on enhancing and get more insight in the supply chain and how can we make it better. And what we've seen the last few years, and that's where my slide is about, there is no sustainable solution without sustainable demand. And we see our budget holders never ask a sustainable question. They ought to do, because it's policy of the Dutch government, but they find it very difficult. And
1 minute, please, Albert.
We had a recent discussion, and we helped them to create an innovative, sustainable demand. You have to work with the market, with the suppliers, and you have to be a director in the supply chain. And for at least we not, as a purchasing department, has to start a sustainable program, but the demand side, and we help them with that. Well, thank you for my time, and that was my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Albert. And for sharing the experience of the Dutch government, emphasizing the importance of contract management and independent monitoring and creating sustainable demand, working with the market to get purchasing with impact. A simple and powerful phrase, purchasing with impact. Thank you. We go on to the next one. Next presenter, Carla Canal Rosic, International Relations Officer at the Barcelona City Council in Spain. Carla, welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. So, I work also in policy coherence for development and in public procurement. So I choose also to talk about transparency, as two of our colleagues already did, no? Hakim and Stefan Beauvais also talk somehow about transparency. Because okay, let me just see my presentation. I've made some changes. Because, well, I think we choose this because it is a requirement to be able to work on many other topics, and because maybe we already knew the existing deficits, but COVID crisis or any other crisis brings the importance of transparency into light, no? Why? Well, I'm going to talk about mandatory transparency of the whole supply chain. That means from mineral extraction to final disposal of waste. Why not? What I said, because it's a requirement for due diligence, and it is also a requirement to create sustainable change that can face a crisis and that can provide rights to all the people and the earth. So, the transparency is the requirement of transparency. It's for companies, of course, but also public buyers, because public buyers also are in the chain. So we also have to demand this transparency. We have to be able to say what are we buying and what are we. So I just wanted to focus, because that's what we are working on in Barcelona City Council. It's where can you ask this transparency? Hakim spoke about many other places where you can ask transparency. But I wanted to focus in the procurement law. So transparency can and should be demanded to all companies without any legal problems for the public buyers, I mean, within the procurement law. And as Hakim said, not only within the procurement law. So now we should be asking for this transparency, and sometimes we are not doing it. So we are not doing our job. And how and where we can ask it in the tenders and in the contract. We can ask, for example, in particular conditions, as Electronics Watch does, but also in other places, in the subject matter of the contract, in the selection criteria, in the technical specifications, and in the award criteria. But as we are working with Electronics Watch and with many other subjects, we see that when you put requirements in contract conditions, that means that it is applied to anybody that will have the tender, will have these conditions. Companies cannot ask you cannot say that this is too much, or that this is not fair, or they cannot go against this requirement of transparency, because it is something that you will ask any company. So
1 minute, please.
Great. So yeah, just to finish, of course, it's for every company in every tender, and also in the web, that as our colleague said, and also like to know each other. And after there are some, of course, there are other fields related, no? So after you have to ask for transparency, but after you have to develop mechanisms for follow-up and for control, no? So, and this is why is it useful to work in network or to do aggregate purchases. And yeah, and also that public buyers have to demand business partners with capacity to assess human rights supply chain risks, so transparency, and also provide remedies. And this is also another subject that I'm not going to talk. So yeah, I just wanted to underline the importance of transparency, and that as public buyers, at least in Europe and also in other countries, we can ask it already from now, and we are allowed, and we should be asking more transparency. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carla, for highlighting this critical theme of transparency necessary to drive sustainable change. I thought it was interesting that you emphasize that both companies and public buyers need to be transparent and have different transparency requirements, and that we create an even playing field for all companies by making it mandatory in tenders. So thank you so much. And we go on to the next speaker, Farid Amir, who is public sector lead for the Modern Slavery Unit at the Home Office in the UK. Farid, are you there, and can you hear us?
Yep. Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
I wanted to present on the purpose of transparency and why we in the UK are so obsessed with it, but also why as central government we've started to walk the walk and become more transparent about the risks of forced labor in our own supply chains. So in 2015, we introduced the Modern Slavery Act, which made us the first country in the world to require businesses to publish annual modern slavery statements and be transparent about how they are tackling modern slavery in their operations and supply chains. I know California already had such legislation, but it's not a country, so technically we get that title of being the first country in the world. The transparency provision in the Modern Slavery Act was designed to create internal and external drivers for businesses to take action and invest more resources into due diligence in their supply chains. So the internal drivers were built in because statements require board approval and director level sign-off, which creates that senior leadership accountability for how those companies are tackling modern slavery. And then there's also the external drivers. So these statements are publicly available, so NGOs, media, consumers, investors, and others can scrutinize a business's performance. And whenever you place some sort of reporting regulation on business, you're pretty likely to start having stakeholders turn around and ask government why we aren't reporting in the same way. And so in the context of modern slavery reporting, It's an issue that obviously affects almost every sector and every country in the world. And as central government, we spend a lot of money on procurement. We spend about £50 billion a year in central government and an additional 200 billion in the wider public sector. We're bound to have risks of forced labor, modern slavery, labor exploitation, whatever you want to call it, in our supply chains. So we agreed with stakeholders on this occasion and said, yeah, we should be reporting ourselves. So we put advice in 2018 to the former Prime Minister recommending that she announced our intention to publish the government's first modern slavery statement. And she did so at the G20 in a massive international event. And this gave us a lot of internal buy-in to accelerate our efforts. We created a cross-government working group that ensures 20 departments across government were engaged and participating in our efforts. We published guidance that sets out the steps departments should be taking throughout the commercial life cycle to tackle modern slavery. We ran training on how to apply the guidance to over 250 commercial and procurement staff across government. We also launched the modern slavery assessment tool, which is freely available to any public sector organization in the UK and allows them to identify and manage modern slavery risks with their suppliers. Across central government, we directly work with over 400 suppliers through this tool. We announced plans to evaluate social value criteria in all major procurements. One of our departments even started a project with Electronics Watch. And in total, we worked with over 100 officials in central government to develop the government modern slavery statement and report on all this sort of activity that we'd undertaken. And we did this all in just over 1 year. And there's no doubt in my mind that the commitment to publish a transparency statement played a massive role in getting all of government to do so much work in 1 year to put us in a good position to report on our efforts. Knowing that our work will be scrutinized by the most senior people in government, including the Prime Minister and external stakeholders, helped us get the resources and attention we needed internally to do this work. So we published the statement in March this year.
1 minute, please.
Thanks, Brian. You can find the statement by searching UK Government Modern Slavery Statement, and it includes a personal forward from the Prime Minister. The statement makes it clear that we are just at the beginning of our journey, and despite all the progress we made in that 1 year, there's still such a long way to go. In the statement, we committed ourselves to 13 goals to help us make those steps, and ministerial departments will be publishing individual statements starting next year, and they can provide more granularity on what they're doing compared to us publishing it for all of government. We've also launched a consultation on strengthening the Modern Slavery Act, including bringing public bodies such as local authorities, police forces, and others in scope for the requirement. We'll publish our response to the consultation very, very soon, so I can't say exactly what will be in it, but if you look at the consultation and the measures that we've consulted on, you can tell that we are definitely keen for there to be more transparency in the private and public sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Farid, and for reporting on the exciting work of the UK government. I think it's probably fair to say that the transparency provision in the Modern Slavery Act has been and continues to be a critical driver of transparency globally in many supply chains. And also thank you for recognizing that if government is requiring companies to report and to be transparent, government should itself walk the talk and be transparent and report on what they're doing themselves, as the Home Office has started to do. So thank you so much for this. We go on to the next presenter, Kathleen Mackay, who is manager of sustainable supply chains of the Stockholm region in Sweden. Kathleen, welcome, and can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Good. And my presentation, great. Know your supply chain. Carla, I'm afraid I might be repeating some of what you said, but hopefully I'll have some new points to make. Know your supply chain. For anyone who's worked with the bank sector, this may remind you of KYC, which is Know Your Customer, which is about taking measures to fight money laundering. So that was my inspiration. So it's kind of basic when you think about it to know your supply chains, but it proves challenging in practice, especially for big procuring authorities such as ourselves. So for us as a public authority to require that our suppliers know their supply chain and are transparent about it with us is something that we've been actively working on for a couple of years. And it became very obvious this spring that this is even more important in times of crisis. Our suppliers are often resellers, so they wouldn't be the big brands. And sometimes we've discovered that they don't have this information. They haven't bothered to gather this information. They can have an agent, for example, in another European country. And so there's layers between them and the producing, the manufacturers, for example. And I think it's fair to draw the conclusion that if they don't even know the supply chain, then they cannot possibly be working to mitigate the risks in the supply chain either. So they're by definition not fulfilling their contractual obligations. So Carla was into this. I think it's a good idea to include in your contracts, at least that when the contracts enter into force, you will want to know the address of the major final assemblies and perhaps even choose some of the high-risk components manufacturers, and that you get this information during the time of the contract. And Electronics Watch has such clauses, so if you need concrete examples of what that could look like, you can get that. For us, we've even thought that there is an added value of working with suppliers that know their supply chains. And so sometimes we verified this already at the bidding stage. So we've either had it as a mandatory requirement that they verify at bidding, not in IT, I have to admit, but in medical equipment, but also as an award criteria. So we've said we're willing to pay more for bidders who actually can show to us at the time of handing in their tender that they have the structures in place, they will be able to perform their contract and to give us this information because they're already working in this manner. There's a challenge here. Our suppliers, especially in the IT industry or ICT, have informed us that the supply chains are dynamic, which would mean that the information we get at bidding or during the contract period may change. And the question here is how much information can we administer? So it's not just about asking for lots of information, you've got to be able to do something with it. And even just, I mean, if you think about the amount of things we procure, I think you have to think about how much information can you handle, what can you actually do with it. But I think those are details that can be worked out. The main principle is some kind of obligation on your suppliers that then map the supply chain. We can also take a step more and not just map what factories, but what are the risks? How do they work to monitor these factories in the supply chain? So like I said, these are things we've been working on, but in times of crisis, monitoring has become extremely challenging. Other speakers have already mentioned that audits are not taking place. They haven't during the spring. Very few are taking place right now. And at the same time, we know that the risks are increasing. It could be due to high demand. You've closed down, you're reopening.
1 minute, please.
Yes, risks of excessive overtime are probably higher now than they ever been, not to mention the risks of health and living, confined working conditions and confined living conditions. So the health risks to the workers. So the risks are increasing, all monitoring capacities are decreasing. And that's why it's extra important to have suppliers with knowledge of the risks, established relationships down the supply chain. And sometimes we do get reports directly from monitoring partners or human rights activists on the ground. And then we need to have suppliers who can work with us down the supply chain to address what we discover is going on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. And thank you for this parallel between the financial world and the public procurement, where it's just as important for the public buyers to know their suppliers as it is for financial managers, banks to know their customers. And and as you say, how can you mitigate the risk? How can you prevent risk if you don't know your customer or you don't know your supply chain, which highlights the importance of innovative forms of monitoring during times of crisis when risks are indeed increasing. So thank you very much for that that parallel. We go on to Pia Ure Trulsen, who is a CSR manager at the Norwegian Hospital Procurement Trust in Norway. So Pia, welcome, and can you hear us? Let's see, Pia, are you there? I can't hear Pia right now. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you very much. So I'm working for Norwegian Hospital Procurement. We are responsible for buying all sort of things to all the public hospitals in Norway. And I've been working with ethical supply chains during the last 10 years and have one goal, that we will have ethical and transparent suppliers in all the tenders we do. But how can we do that? First of all, we need to have equal qualification or contract criteria, not only in Norway, but I believe we need it in the whole part of Europe, so we can stick together. We have to comply, or our suppliers need to comply with all the ILO core conventions within human and workers' rights. And we must ensure what some of my colleagues have said, that the supply chains should be transparent. We need, as a public buyer, to know where our products are coming from. But I think the most important part is not setting criteria or qualification demands if you're not following up your contracts. So I think we need to be better within public procurement to follow up our contracts, also within social criteria. So what would be the responsibility to our suppliers? They need to choose the good manufacturers. The manufacturers should know that they really have to be fair to their workers if they should join a public contract. They should be a partner, the supplier should be a partner to drive improvements. It's not about comply or die, it's more about making the world a better place tomorrow. But I think we can ask our suppliers also to know what kind of issues are there around the world within the social aspects. How are the workers' rights in the world? And we need our suppliers to be aware of these issues around the world within the different categories. But how can our suppliers be transparent? We have been asking for a country of origin in all our products for the last 8 years. And in the beginning, the suppliers will tell us it's our business, it's not your business. But we need our suppliers to be transparent and tell us about the supply chains. They should also tell us about the non-conformities in the supply chain, so we are aware. Maybe we can work together to find better solutions for the manufacturers. What we need to do as public procurers, we have some responsibilities to set the demands and follow up. We need also to cooperate with our procurers, and we also have to be very, very clear to our suppliers what are our expectations, so they know what we want them to do, and they should do what we demand them to do, of course. But we also, when we are cooperating with our suppliers, it's very important that we will be strict and we will walk the talk if we say we will end the contracts due to the fact they have not followed up on workers and human rights. We need to have the dialogue not only with our suppliers, but I believe with suppliers or manufacturers all around the world.
1 minute, please.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Within the pandemic, we have been buying the PPE products, and I think it shows that we have to know our supply chain, not only who we have on contract today, but who can we meet in contracts for tomorrow as well. And of course, we need to communicate our findings and our what's going on in public medias as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pia, for weaving together so many of the important themes of the presenters already here and doing it so in such a concise way. I like the fact that you are stressing the follow-up on the criteria that we set, that it is not about comply or die, but it's about making the world a better place. And so keep your eye on the prize is an important bottom line message. And if you do that, then perhaps you can also encourage suppliers to be more transparent and even tell you about the non-conformances of the problems that they have. We're moving on now to the final presenter. So last but not least, to Angus Warren, who is the CEO of Advanced Procurement for Universities and Colleges, APUC, in Scotland in the UK. Angus, welcome, and can you hear us?
I can hear you, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Excellent, okay. Just for those that aren't aware of us, what we are, we're the Centre of Procurement Expertise and the Purchasing Consortium for all of Scotland's universities and colleges. So we're here to sort of promote best practice, both policy and legal compliance, as well as operate as a consortia and work on collaborative procurement, collaborative purchasing of goods, services for the sector. My subject today is to talk about using technology to maximize transparency. Transparency is the absolute key thing we need to move the agenda forward for human rights within our supply chains and workers' rights. I think that it's interesting actually that obviously we're dealing with electronics, and I think the solution to us being able to manage the electronic supply chain is to use technology more than we do now, so that we can actually use it to hold a mirror up to the technology companies on what they're doing. I think we've recently done some work with Electronics Watch on mainstreaming or piloting social media scanning using GlobalWorks. I'm not sure, I won't have time to go into that today, but an organization who scans social media to look for indications of workers' rights issues in the electronic supply chain. That's been incredibly useful, and I think we need to move to a model where we use data gathered, especially when it's based on mass data, consistent mass data, to address issues and bring issues to the supply market. The supply market will be reluctant. The supply market will not like anything that's going to increase transparency, especially transparency in a way that they can't control. And obviously, social media is harder to keep a grip on than it is to issue through the RBA. So these technologies have huge potential, I think, to develop going forward. And there may be more than one type of platform that we can use to do that. I think we can explore increasing use of whistleblower portals, although they do come with some challenges because there needs some very careful validation of these. They're open to mass abuse also, but they also do have a place, and I think it's important that we have mechanisms to affect that in all public buying organizations. I think we could look at more about working with other NGOs in the human rights area, people like Amnesty International, because generally in countries where there are general human rights abuses, there's also workers' rights abuses. The two go hand in hand. If you have a very effective regime in a country to manage people's human rights, you also tend to have a very effective regime to manage your workers' rights. So, and obviously the reverse is true. I think we should use technology to create a international database, starting off fairly simply, but on locations and building status and information on supply sites, supplier sites, sub-supplier sites, going down the supply chain, maybe creating a unique identifier for each one. As Kathleen said, that the electronic supply chains are very dynamic. But if we have something which has got a set of unique identifiers, it's much easier if we can sort of, if suppliers can then say, this is produced at like T5, G4 and M4 at level 1, and then go down using internationally recognized identifiers. I know there's companies like Dun & Bradstreet that do it, but you have to pay for that privilege. And it's not complete it's definitely not complete for the electronic supply chain. So something where we can start to build that, I think is quite important. And I think it would be good if we're going to work seriously with RBA, I think it would be good for them to open their audit database to public buyers so that we've got the transparency of the information that they have. If they're genuinely there to support and improve workers' rights, I think that they will support it. I'm not suggesting we make it as something that's absolutely public, but something that can be shared with public buyers so that we, don't duplicate efforts, so that we can work with them more in a genuine partnership with the supply market. Failing that, obviously, to work with individual major brands. If
1 minute, please, Angus. 1 minute.
Thanks, Bjorn. So I think going forward, I mean, what can we do to improve these things at this time? So I think, yeah, as I said at the very beginning, transparency through technology is key. We need to collectively invest, I think, in transparency technology so that we can maximize the value of the worker voice. And that is easiest to obtain when we're using technology platforms that are widely used across the populations of the world. So that was really all for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angus, for taking the challenge of transparency one step forward to ask the critical question, well, how to make it practical, and what are the sources of transparency, drawing upon the information that we get from NGOs, human rights organizations, social media, and also from companies. So thank you very much for this, Angus. And with this, we're going on to the next phase of this webinar. I want to first thank all of the presenters for the fantastic, insightful presentations, for every single person for keeping within the 5-minute limit. I don't think it was even necessary for me to give the 1 minute warning, but I started doing that, so I kept on doing that, so it would be equal for everybody. Thank you so much for everybody for this. So let's look at what are some of the common themes here, and I think that you've heard them. First of all, the goals are ambitious, of course. It is to drive economic recovery and responsible business, to ensure respect for the rights of workers, safe conditions, labor rights, environmental responsibility, and to do all that efficiently and with cost savings. So how do you get there? The presenters stressed a number of shared objectives, some common themes: demand, transparency, collaboration. Demand, public procurement demand that is aligned across borders and that is sustainable, that is dependable. Demand that can be innovative, that can drive change. And then transparency was a huge theme, of course, of the presenters, as we have heard. That means transparency of supply chains, where is the products coming from, where are they made. It also means transparency in terms of due diligence, what is their due diligence practices of the companies, and it means transparency of working conditions. As far as having the companies report, here are the problems that I'm having, here are the non-conformances that we're having. And transparency, as we heard, also means transparency of companies, but also transparency of the public buyer. And finally, the final objective here is collaboration. And we heard that collaboration really can work if it's collaboration among public buyers, but also the importance of collaboration between public buyers and suppliers. So other presenters then talked about the specific steps that we need to take to build this kind of sustainable, innovative demand, this transparency and a collaboration. For example, speakers stressed the importance of dialogue on many levels to ensure a strong, unified message to the market. Speakers talked about the contractual obligations to drive transparency, to make it mandatory and to make it uniform that way. We heard about technical solutions such as shared data platforms to make transparency practical. And about, we have heard public buyers talk about the importance of sharing experiences and perhaps putting forward their case studies to drive collaboration and knowledge sharing. And finally, remembering that due diligence and responsible purchasing is in fact a shared responsibility for public buyers and suppliers, and that recognition in itself can drive the collaboration between public buyers and suppliers so that we achieve our end goal here, which simply put is making the world a better place. So putting this all together, perhaps we have here an outline of a theory of change. So let's try to take these steps together to achieve the unified demand, the transparency and the collaboration to drive responsible business, protect worker rights, and ensure resilient supply chains. This concludes the presentation part and the wrap-up part of the presentation. And now I'm turning it over to Peter, who will be coordinating your questions and answers, looking at the tinyurl.com/ewatch2021 site to see what you've put up there. Peter, over to you.
Yes, great. Thank you, Björn. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so you hear me all. So if you have not yet looked up, and probably all the presenters have not yet had the time, if you go to tinyurl.com/ewatch2021, you can see, and you probably see also my screen, you can see a lot of things have happened here actually. So we have 12 minutes left. We probably won't be able to go through all of these points, but I would like to first go on my ideas and then go to questions so we can actually think about having a Q&A. So let's go first to my ideas. Basically the ideas that you brought forward, how you think public procurement should think about developing. So the first one is doing the right thing and doing it in the right way. The right thing is best value for money. The right way, not at the expense of people or workers or the environment, preserving human labor and environmental rights. This got actually 2 upvotes. The next one was bring together social responsible public procurement with sustainable investment practices by public investors, for example, pension funds, to strengthen the leverage in engagement with industry. This is something we have not heard today, but only in Kathleen's mentioning of the financial industry. The next one was the love the thought of consequences on businesses that either lie or choose not to reply to independent evidence of serious violations. And we actually have a question also relating to this. So this will come up later again. And the last idea that was written down here on the board, and you can actually still write your questions on the board or upvote specific questions you like. So the last idea is use your leverage to support workers in supply chains to self-organize into genuine trade unions where possible. Oh, now I skipped something. The spotlight you shine gives them a chance they did not have before. So this is actually something that Björn and I and everybody at Electronics Watch are very, very often discussing, that the best monitoring is actually not done by monitoring partners, but actually by workers themselves, what we actually use. And having strong labor unions in every factory of the world, we would be actually already knowing that a lot of things, a lot of positive things are happening. So all of these ideas are, I think, really great. We will be following up on them, and we will be trying to integrate them also as the other 12 ideas into our future work. So let's skip the comments, because we have a lot of questions. And comments you can obviously also just check out. So I will try to ask some of the speakers to answer to the questions. I have organized them by upvote. So this one got actually 6 pluses. So the question is, as we know, audits are deficient. which alternative concepts could be used as proof of better practices in the realm of public procurement? And maybe Dimitri, as a monitor, could you maybe shed some brief light on what you think alternative concepts to social audits could be?
I don't have sort of the golden answer on this, but let me share a thought. I think this is a moving target. There was a time when audits did not do worker interviews. They now, many of them in the electronics industry do worker interviews. Some of them do off-site interviews. There was a time when no one was doing worker hotlines. The industry has developed worker hotlines. When the industry tends to take on these ideas that are commonly brought up by civil society and workers' rights organizations, they tend to warp those methods and they no longer work the way they were originally envisioned. One of the things I think we could do to drive better monitoring beyond always maintaining and improving and investing in independent monitoring by workers and workers' rights organizations and unions, is to demand that the industry take responsibility for their monitoring. So when there are reports about serious violations, we should be getting responses from the industry that explain why they either think they resolved the problem or they deny that that problem exists. That needs to be a conversation that is pursued. That's a very limited conversation because the sites that are under investigation are few, but that would drive deeper consequences.
Okay, so thanks for this quite positive perspective on how it's actually changing to the better step by step. It's obviously not as fast as we would like it to change, but there is a visible impact of the activities of civil society organizations as well as public buyers who demand actually some proof of verification. We will have some questions on this too. The next question is to procurers and especially to so it's really procurement perspective. So what we have seen is a lot of discussion on collaboration. So the question is, how important are procurement consortia? Should countries, regions that want to develop towards socially responsible public procurement as a first step try to set up such buying clubs? And how complex is this actually? Steve, you have been talking a bit about how you build this up. Maybe you can give us a brief overview. What's the strength besides just cost issues, and especially how complex is it?
Sure. So there are a couple of things. Firstly, I would suggest not waiting until you've got your consortia in place to implement these things. The best time to implement modern slavery laws was 10 years ago, and the second best time is now. So let's get started straight away. Procurement. Collaborative procurement is not easy. You do have to bring people together in a trusted environment, and you have to have some very common objectives across the group. Typically, I've found it grows out of existing collaborative groups. So whether there's existing discussion, existing shared work. We've been doing it for a very, very long time, since the early 1990s. So we've had that advantage that the trust network is already built, and you're leveraging that quite heavily to add on the requirement for not just cost saving, which is really simple to argue for, but to implement corporate and social responsibility, which is can be more difficult depending on, especially if it then costs more. But I don't see it as a zero-sum game either. I don't think it necessarily needs to drive costs up, although you can choose to do that. So you could choose to pay more to get a better outcome. In terms of where to start, I would start with a collaboration that you're already involved in, groups that you work with closely. Audit's not unique in this worldwide. There are groups that do university collaboration in just about every region that I can think of. There's GIANT in Europe, there's JISC and UCISA in the UK, there's a French group as well. They exist in every country that I've spoken to. And we actually now are getting to the point where we have a group of groups It's called CHEETA, which is the Coalition of Higher Education IT Associations. It is the group of groups. And so, we're starting to get significantly more advanced, but please don't let it stop you from working locally as a starting point.
Thank you, Steve. That is, I think, quite a good observation. Start and then develop further. So let's move to the next question. It is about the dialogue with ICT suppliers. And this is a bit about the proofs we can ask to be sure that they are doing serious efforts to respect workers in COVID times. And as I would group it together with also the next question, basically asking what are possible questions to ask now in a dialogue. And I want to provide a first answer, and then I will ask also one of our panelists. So one of the things that you can immediately do is after this webinar, you can go to the Electronics Watch website and you can download this document. This is publicly available to everybody. This is basically a survey document that you can either send to your suppliers or use specific questions, and this is focusing on issues related to COVID-19. So there is a section on occupational health and safety, as you see. There are questions on further below. You have questions occupational health and safety. You have questions on labor rights. You have questions on management system consideration. You have questions on environmental and community impacts, and also on safeguarding privacy. The focus of this document is not policies. The focus is really asking questions about what are your actions as companies. So this is something you can start today. You have the questions. You can also download it in Spanish. So if your organization is working in Spanish, you can go to our site and download it. But as I know that Kathleen, the region of Stockholm is really good and developing very strongly supply chain engagement and talking to your suppliers. Could you maybe expand a bit on your experience of what are the proofs that you are actually asking for your supply chain to see what they are doing both in the time of crisis as well as beyond?
With 1 minute left, I think that it's okay. It's good. I think that the questions are excellent. I think the challenge is in verifying that this is actually happening on the ground. We've been in a conversation with a reseller who has increased prices because the manufacturer has said that it's more costly for them now to have all of these COVID prevention measures in place to protect the workers. And when I asked our supplier, because what happens is, it gets more expensive, but who in the end ends up paying for this? Well, it's us. Someone said, I think buyers bear the costs, the workers bear the loss. I was like, how are you verifying that they're actually doing this and they're not just increasing the prices? And they didn't have an answer. They was sort of like, no, well, we've asked them, and this is their report with all the measures. They weren't even verifying because they were just passing on the costs to us. So I think there, the contact with, if you know your supply chain, you know what factory to ask about. We basically need a human rights activist for every single factory in our supply chain, or a monitoring partner, because right now that's the only way that we can verify that yes, there's a self-evaluation, there's what they say, but how do you know that they're actually doing this? And I think that's a big challenge for everyone. I don't have an answer to that except for getting information from the ground.
Well, and this is actually a great last thought, because this brings us full circle to the discussion on transparency. We need transparency on basically every level to understand what the supply chain is actually doing, and the supply chain within the supply chain actually also needs more transparency. So the various companies also understand who is actually bearing the cost. So with this, we have touched upon many things. We have now reached 1 hour and 30 minutes. That was what we were planning for. So we won't be stealing more time of you. Thank you for all the speakers for your great insights you provided. Thank you for all commentators and all listeners for your ideas, for your comments, for your questions. This was one of our webinars. There will be more. We will be planning, or we are already planning, a occupational health and safety summit in November, December. So go to our website if you want to learn more about that. Just look out always on our website for more of these webinars, and we will be bringing you some more insights into this very vast and vastly moving field. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Democracy.